So, is everybody already talking about the resemblances between Killers of the Flower Moon and Goodfellas? Not yet? Well, they ought to start pretty soon, because the list of the similarities between the two movies is pretty exhaustive. From start towards the midpoint, the familiarity of the plot points might be subtle, but when the climax kicks in, I believe most people understand that Scorsese openly recycles his older classic. The issue is that while the corresponding climax works perfectly for Goodfellas, I don't believe it's very convenient for Killers of the Flower Moon. Certain elements really seem to be out of place in the movie, and Marty applying familiar formula to a story of a very different texture is just a wrong choice, I believe. At the moment of recording of this video, feedback from audience on the movie is largely positive. And to be very clear, I do not consider Killers of the Flower Moon a bad movie, but I kinda think that the script is not that good. It does not add much to the premise or to the actual real-life tragedies that happened to the Osage people. And the main issues that I have with the screenplay are coming from the distribution of runtime between characters, script persisting to be as close to the real-life events as possible, and Scorsese trying to apply the formulas from his earlier works to the story of a very different substance. So let's talk about it in details, fellow film enthusiasts. We are going to spoil Killers of the Flower Moon and Goodfellas as well. Protagonist Problem. We need to get started with the protagonist problem. The protagonist of Goodfellas is Henry Hill, Ray Liotta's character. And the main protagonist of Killers of the Flower Moon, at least on paper, is Ernest Burkert, Leonardo DiCaprio's character. They also have similar roles in the story. For the most of the movie, Henry Hill is a subordinate to Jimmy Conway, Robert De Niro's character. He gains a lot of wealth and power in doing so, and towards the end he needs to rat out Jimmy in order to save himself from the authorities and possibly from Jimmy himself. Ernest Burkert is a subordinate to William Hale, also Robert De Niro's character. He gains a lot of wealth in doing so, and towards the end he needs to rat out Hale in order to save himself from the authorities and Hale himself. So pretty close, right? But the similarities in plot points does not really translate to the similarity in our feelings. Henry Hill is a guy that we cheer for in Goodfellas. If not cheer, at least we are excited with the prospect of his criminal deeds. Because Henry was fascinated with gangster life from childhood. He achieves a lot of his dreams and lives his best life at least until a certain point. Some choices that he makes as a wise guy are incorrect, but they are truly his own choices and Henry understands the consequences throughout.
What happens when you go away? I've told you that we're on our own. Forget everybody else. Forget Paulie.
Ernest Burkert does not live his best life throughout the movie. He clearly suffers with some of the things he does, and his actions are not really his choices. He is clearly manipulated by his uncle, quote-unquote, King Hale, and some actions taken under these manipulations are not always in his best interest. Henry is adequate as a mobster. The plot-driving jobs might be sometimes led by Jimmy and Tommy, but he can successfully run his own operations, and he just knows how to handle things. Ernest fails miserably at handling things. He needs to mention King Hale's name during delegating every task to anybody, or pretty much during every confrontation, because he does not command any authority himself. And even if he has his own improvisation to the task, they usually fail miserably. So if we cannot cheer Ernest in succeeding as a criminal, and if we do not enjoy watching him handle business, we need to at least anticipate something to root for in his arc. And I know that I did. All throughout the movie I wanted him to stand up for himself and confront his uncle. And I know that he kinda does it at the end, but it's honestly too late for me. Ernest passed so many opportunities to work for his own agenda for once. Hale accommodates the killings of Ernest's wife's family members from the shadows. Ernest does nothing. Hale openly makes Ernest participate in the killings of his wife's family members. Ernest obliges. Hale is not happy with Ernest's upcoming baby. Ernest does not protest. Hale makes Ernest drug his wife and makes it clear that Molly needs to die. Ernest obliges again. Hale asks Ernest to sign the papers so that Hale becomes his main beneficiary in case of his death. Ernest signs the paper. Just come on, dude. Even when he starts cooperating with FBI and appears before the court, Ernest is intimidated by Hale's lawyer and needs another 20 minutes of runtime to finally decide to take a full stand at court. Ultimate achievement might be fine, and we also have this direct confrontation in a prison cell, but it just does not count. It's too late to feel any kind of remorse for Ernest. He just fails as a protagonist, both as a guy who we cheer for and as a guy who slowly accomplishes his needs. But of course, as a contrast to Goodfellas, in Killers of the Flower Moon we have another character that we should clearly cheer for, Molly. She is much more sympathetic and has more colorful personality. Molly stays true to herself throughout all the hardships, and she tries to be as active in her attempts to fight injustice as possible. But this is the main source of the problem. If we just read the description of the story, a list of Molly's actions might be comparable to Ernest's. But when you watch the movie, the balance is really off. Let's provide examples. Molly calls a tribe meeting, she puts up a reward for finding Anna's killers, she tells her priest about her fears, she also tries to be open to her husband. Molly asks Ernest to be personally in charge of taking insulin without the buffer of Hale's doctors. Molly, while terribly sick, goes to Washington to bring federal attention to Osage killings. When we list her actions like this, it's a lot, but it's buried down in the busy plot of the movie. Each of Molly's actions are shown to us in the scenes that are rarely longer than 1 minute. Less important scenes with Ernest sections and challenges take much more time than that. So while Molly's sections are very important and they eventually do contribute in finding out the truth, movie does not treat them like that. If you want us to root for Molly, then just be confident and make her a clear protagonist. Let us spend more time with her, emphasize the importance of her actions by making them a bigger portion of the total runtime. Still show us the Hale Burkert mob shenanigans, but maybe focus more on Molly slowly uncovering them. Just put more emphasis on the character, which is the emotional core of the movie. I believe I know why Scorsese and writing team framed the movie as it is. It looks influenced with trying to provide the meta-commentary on the real-life story. I will expand on that in more details on the later segment in the video. Just let me sum up here that from the story perspective alone, the protagonist does not work for me, and there were clearly better choices in handling this part, with either leaning towards Molly or at least giving some spine to Ernest. Spineless fuck. Climax Problems. The next problematic thing that we are going to discuss is the climax. And let's be honest, if not the climax, this video would have not been justified. There are similarities in general story beats between the movies, but the climax of Killers of the Flower Moon makes you think, oh, I have seen all this somewhere else before. Let's just examine the story beats of the climax. So, in Goodfellas, Jimmy Conway, Robert De Niro's character, starts to wipe out everybody who can rat him out just before the climax. The climax starts with Henry's realization that cops might be onto him. Henry gets caught, but temporarily gets out. Henry has his final conversations with Jimmy and Karen. Henry goes to trial, rats Jimmy and Polly out, and is put in the witness protection program. Movie ends with the text of recapping the remaining real lives of the people involved. In Killers of the Flower Moon, William Hale, Robert De Niro's character, starts to wipe out everybody who can rat him out just before the climax. The climax starts with Ernest's realization that cops might be onto him. Ernest is caught, but when we think the trial's gonna start, he is temporarily pulled out of prison. Ernest has his final conversations with his wife and Hale. Ernest goes to trial, rats Hale out, and is given freedom. Then he has one additional conversation with Molly. Then we get this unusual theatrical recap of the remaining real lives of the people involved. So the structure of the two movies' climaxes are extremely close to each other. Scorsese is very openly ripping off his own earlier work, but what works in Goodfellas feels much flatter in Killers of the Flower Moon. First of all, pacing in Goodfellas' climax is much more intact. Tension is built with the chase, it's released when Henry gets out with a bail bond, it's slowly built back up when Henry fails to garner any support, and it's released once again with his choice to rat Jimmy out. He is much more active in the climax and is driving the plot forward. Pacing of Killers of the Flower Moon's climax is all over the place. Ernest being caught is largely uneventful, he's kind of psychologically tortured at the police station, and there are some face-to-face confrontations, but while it might be tense, no real momentum is built over this. We at least anticipate the trial to be a big thing, but no, it's not the teaser. Just 1 minute of shouting and Ernest is back on the street. Then Ernest talks with his wife, is pushed to not cooperate with the police by his extended family, Ernest goes back to prison, his child dies, traumatic moment for sure, but not really a direct consequence of any of the movie's main plot. After the funeral, Ernest decides to confront Hale and finally rats him out. As a resolution of that, he gets closure with his wife as well when Molly reveals that she understands full well that Ernest was drugging her and leaves him. As we can see, Ernest is not really active at all. He is manipulated by Hale once again, and the biggest catalyst to him happens to be this random tragedy that happens to him. This final recap afterwards is more in line with the assassination of Jesse James spectacle scene than with the Goodfellas final recap. While Ernest is not really in control of his actions in the climax, unlike Henry for example, he still is a main focus. Molly is part of that, but she's passive during the initial conversation, then she mourns her child, suffers during the court process, then she chooses actively to leave her husband, and that's it. Honestly, this is still more interesting than what Ernest does. But once again, just like the overall movie, Molly does not feel to be the main focus of the climax when she really should be. Generally, everything seems to be an incompetent copy of a better film's much better climax. Which is a shame, because Osage's real-life tragedy is more meaningful than Henry Hill's and Jimmy Conway's real-life shenanigans. Texture differences. So this all brings us to the important question. With all these similarities between Killers of the Flower Moon and Goodfellas, does Scorsese understand that he has two very different stories at hand? Answer is undeniably yes. The similarities are mostly used for the outline, but actual texture of the movie does feel different. Goodfellas is a movie about exploring the romanticization of Italian/Irish mafia. Killers of the Flower Moon is a story about Indian and specifically Osage tribe tragedy. Let's just examine how the mob deeds play out in each movie. In Goodfellas, everything looks cool. Voiceover describing the general lives of the mobsters, cool. Mobsters hanging out in their leisure time, cool. Henry running the drug operation inside and outside of the prison, maybe not so cool, but exciting for sure. Jimmy orchestrating and executing the robbery of the century, very cool. Now let's compare it to Killers of the Flower Moon. Initially, Hale acts in the shadows. Ernest is not fully on board. When he needs to get rid of Anna, he gets his nephew to drive her home very openly, and on that very day, Anna dies. Then Hale needs to kill Henry in order to get the insurance money, $25,000. Ernest finds some drunk on Hale's behalf, he needs to stage a suicide, but instead shoots him in the back of the head and then takes a gun with him. Clearly a murder, not a suicide. Hale never receives a penny out of the operation. Then Ernest and Hale need to get rid of Ernest's in-laws, Bill and Rita Smith. So Ernest approaches petty criminal Blackie Thompson and in order to persuade him to take the job, suggests that Blackie steals Ernest's car. So Ernest receives insurance money and Blackie gets a car. But Blackie is caught, not once, but twice. And ultimately, it becomes the beginning to an end. When ultimately Smiths are getting killed, the best Hale can come up with is to leave town, so he's far away at the time of the explosion. But when he gets back, everybody still understands who benefited from Smiths being dead. There are more examples, but you get the idea. Every mob job in Goodfellas is cool and exciting, every mob job in Killers of the Flower Moon is dull and sloppy. The same applies to the main antagonist, William King Hale. With De Niro's character Jimmy Conway, we get this, definition of cool. Hale is none of that. His conversation with his nephew is often cringy. When he tries to perform at a celebration, nobody pays any attention to him. When he needs to manipulate someone, he has only one approach. He goes to somebody as a friend, provides some kind of information, expects them to act a certain way based on that. Sometimes this works, sometimes it does not, but Hale never really attempts anything else. When FBI guy approaches him for an advice, this is what he comes up with.
There's just bad luck.
And of course, nobody buys that.
Seems more like an epidemic than bad luck to me.
People only respect Hale when he brings money to the table. And that is the whole point. Goodfellas is a story that demonstrates how well organized Italian-Irish mafia was. Killers of the Flower Moon demonstrates how some stupid pieces of shit could take advantage of the Osage people, underlining the length of their vulnerable position. This is a strong meta-commentary on the subject. If we read between the lines, we understand that Hale should have never managed what he did, but the system was so much broken that almost anybody could thrive there and build an empire on the corpses of the Osage. I believe that this meta-commentary, in addition to portraying the suffering of Osage tribe, will lead to Killers of the Flower Moon being a critical success. It will be nominated for many Academy Awards, I imagine, possibly including the Best Picture, and it might even win. But we know how the Academy works. Sometimes the subject that the movie covers is more important than how it actually does it. The real-life story of Killers of the Flower Moon was a very powerful one, but the screenplay at hand did not do it justice. Meta-commentary is fine. Bringing a lot of attention to the story with bright stars is fine. But it does not justify 3.5-hour runtime. The point that the mobsters of Killers of the Flower Moon are incompetent sons of bitches could have been communicated in half of the runtime. I'm not afraid of the long movies, but if you use this much runtime, you need to make sure that the emphasis is put on the core of the story, which in this movie, unfortunately, is not. So I do not pretend that I'm a better filmmaker or better film critic than Martin Scorsese. Then how did Scorsese allow this? How did he waste so many opportunities to make the story better? There are a few answers. The first one is the source material. Killers of the Flower Moon is loosely adapted from the book of the same name. Then in the writing process, creative crew has been meeting with the remaining representatives of Osage tribe and was enriching the screenplay with the actual stories they told. So the final product is a blend of the original novel and real-life stories, but somewhere along the line Marty compromised basic storytelling principles in order to stay as close to real-life events as possible. The second one is just the capitalist nature of Hollywood. Lily Gladstone is a fine actress and she does amazing job in this movie, but he's not Leonardo DiCaprio or Robert De Niro. During the production, there were reports coming out that Scorsese was debating about who the real protagonist should have been, DiCaprio's or De Niro's character, only for us to find out in the cinema that the real heart of the story is Molly Burkhardt, played by Lily Gladstone. I guess this pre-production campaign at least did a good job in catching enough attention to this touching tragedy. And the last thing that creates issues for the story is Marty's obsession with his earlier work, specifically Goodfellas. And Scorsese had a good reason. Martin Scorsese is 81 years old, Robert De Niro is 80. Killers of the Flower Moon might not be the best movie of their respective careers, but it might as well turn out to be the last critically acclaimed movie for each of them. Scorsese had two favorite leads all throughout his career. Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio have been leads of 13 of Scorsese's movies combined, and Killers of the Flower Moon was the first and probably the last occasion where the three musketeers meet on the same stage. Marty just could not give up this opportunity and give the most of the runtime to Lily Gladstone. And maybe he was right. If De Niro and DiCaprio had just 5 scenes together, maybe we would have been outraged. Now, final thoughts. Original story of Killers of the Flower Moon is touching. The screenplay could have been way better, I think. If somebody else directed the same script with different cast, the movie would have been much worse. Marty's direction, the perfect score, good visuals did elevate the screenplay without the question. But if we are looking at the big picture, it looks more like a legacy project for Scorsese and his whole career than a truly good standalone film. I'm going to wonder for a long time what would have been better for the weight of Osage tribe's tragedy. Get the mediocre filmmakers that would prioritize telling their side of the story, or to be a smaller, but still significant part of a possible swan song of the great Martin Scorsese. If you want more analysis of Robert De Niro movies, click on the video on your screen.